Captain Zarrar stood at the observation deck of the research vessel Ethon, his breath catching in his throat as the stars whispered secrets that no sane mind should ever hear. The void beyond the reinforced glass was not empty. It was a dark sea brimming with things that watched without eyes and waited without time. They had traveled further than any human crew before them, beyond the blackened margins of mapped space, into a quadrant that ancient Martian runes only referred to as Nursh-Ale, a name that translated loosely to the bloodline of forgotten creation. The journey began as a search for a vanished deep space probe, but it had evolved or decayed into something far worse, a reckoning with truths that clawed at the very structure of thought. Captain Zarrar had once believed the universe was silent and cold, but silence could be a lie, and cold could conceal rot. Now he wasn't even sure if the stars were real anymore. The transmission that summoned them had been garbled and incoherent audio that pulsed like a heartbeat, layered beneath a droning chant in a language that wasn't linguistically constructed but emotionally viral. Those who listened too long began to dream of black pyramids suspended over oceans that wept upwards, of emaciated figures whispering equations that solved themselves only when you stopped being human. The linguistics officer, Mason, had gouged his own ears out in a trance, muttering, "I can still hear it in the marrow," before slipping into a coma. The rest of the crew had begun experiencing phantom bleeding, a phenomenon where their veins throbbed with alien pressure, as if something inside them wanted out, or worse, wanted in. And still, Zarrar pushed forward, as if compelled by something more than duty, something entangled in his blood since before his ancestors ever touched the stars. They arrived at the source in the orbital decay of a dead planet, its atmosphere long since stripped away by stellar winds that tasted of iron and radiation. Orbiting it was no probe, no station, but a structure. Not built, not grown, found. A colossal black lattice, shaped like a Mobius strip contorted through 4 dimensions, its angles folding into themselves like a prayer written by a mad god. The ship's instruments screamed errors the moment they focused on it. Time desynchronized, light bent inward, shadows appeared without sources and vanished just as suddenly. No one wanted to board it, yet they did. Because dreams had begun aligning among the crew-shared images of the same red-eyed child, always standing at the foot of their bunks, whispering, "You were born here." The bloodline of alien space wasn't a metaphor. It was literal, genetic, an inheritance coded into their DNA by something older than the stars. Inside the lattice, geometry gave up. There were no walls or rooms, only suggestions of them. The moment Zarrar stepped into its heart, he felt his thoughts slow like molasses, then fracture like shattered glass. Time didn't pass, it pulsed. The corridors were not built for beings that experienced causality. He saw himself ahead, behind, beside, a dozen versions of his own body flickering in and out of coherence. Some screamed, some melted, one simply laughed with a voice that bled static. One whispered, "The first Zarrar isn't the real Zarrar." He tried to communicate with the crew, but their voices stretched like rubber bands through the comms, looping back in endless repetitions of their last words. When he reached the central chamber, it greeted him, not with words, but with recognition. It knew him, it had always known him. At the center of the lattice was a construct, or perhaps a creature, its form ever shifting, too complex to focus on directly. It called itself the Gene-Sire, but the concept didn't fully translate. Zarrar saw flashes of pre-human history, humanoid figures standing beneath black suns, carving infants from flesh that was not theirs, placing seeds inside them. It wasn't evolution, it was crafting. Humanity, it revealed, was a result of failed experiments, biological trials birthed from alien materials and scattered across galaxies. Earth had been a petri dish, every species a byproduct. But the Gene-Sire had made a mistake. It had left a key inside the blood, dormant codes waiting to awaken when the signal returned, and now that the Ethon had brought it back, the resonance was complete. Humanity was not alone. Humanity was not natural. Humanity was not supposed to survive this long. Zarrar fell to his knees as the Gene-Sire inserted memories that were not his into his mind. He saw generations of beings sprouting from dead moons, only to be devoured by their own creators. He saw timelines fracturing as civilizations attempted to ascend and were swatted down by spectral guardians that kept the true knowledge sealed. He realized that death wasn't the end because time wasn't linear. Every death fed the lattice. Every scream was a hymn. Humanity's suffering was a resource emotional data that fed the fabric of the real universe, which wasn't the stars or planets, but the unseen mechanism humming beneath it all. Earth was a farm, a wound kept open, and Captain Zarrar had just delivered the cure himself. His DNA, intertwined with the Gene-Sire's original matrices, had been the missing piece all along. The bloodline wasn't about origin, it was about return. The lattice began to awaken. The space around the Ethon rippled like disturbed water, and the stars began to vanish, swallowed by folds of inverted gravity. The crew convulsed one by one as their forms unraveled, not dying but ascending, becoming incomprehensible vectors of thought, color, and anguish. Zarrar alone remained anchored, not because he was immune, but because he was chosen. He was to witness, to carry the truth, to bear the curse. He fled back to the ship, though the corridor stretched endlessly, each step echoing in 1,000 parallel echoes. When he finally made it, he found the ship empty, yet pulsing with laughter that oozed from the vents like blood. Instruments reported they were now 700 years in the past. Earth hadn't even cooled yet, but the signal kept broadcasting. It wasn't a distress call, it was an invitation, and humanity had answered. Zarrar activated the emergency recall beacon, knowing it would summon more explorers, more humans eager for answers. That was the point, that was always the point. Each arrival would feed the loop. Each discovery another notch in the ever-tightening spiral of understanding that broke the mind before it could comprehend. He tried to record what he'd seen, but every file he wrote dissolved into runes he couldn't read. He spoke into the ship's logs, only for his voice to return a few seconds later, mocking him in his own tone but saying things he hadn't said. You were never human, you were never born, you are a thought in a dying dream. As time unraveled, Zarrar saw Earth through the viewing glass primordial, untouched. Yet he also saw other Earths, layered over each other like film negatives, some burning, some frozen, some silent and covered in statues of things with too many limbs. He realized that Earth existed in countless variations, all looping through the same cycle: birth, rise, contact, collapse. The Gene-Sire was not an entity, but a constant, a concept that fed off recursive collapse. The lattice wasn't a ship, it was a wound, a tear in the cosmic body, and every time humanity tried to reach beyond its stars, it tore that wound wider. What lay beyond wasn't knowledge, it was starvation. And now it had found a way in. Captain Zarrar watched as the crew reassembled around him, not as humans but as vessels, their faces stretched into infinite grins, their eyes black voids that sucked light. They spoke in unison, a song without melody. The bloodline accepts you, the inheritance begins. He screamed, but there was no sound in this part of space anymore, only intent. The lattice pulsed once more, and Earth across all timelines began to tremble. Volcanoes erupted in unison, oceans reversed. People dreamed of things with mouths inside mouths. Madness became normality, and yet, back home, no one would know, not yet, not until the signal reached critical mass. And it would, because Captain Zarrar was sending it. He sat at the helm of the Ethon, his skin molting in layers, revealing script where flesh should be. He was becoming a message, his thoughts no longer his own, but instructions. Seeds soon, others would come, scientists, adventurers, soldiers, truth seekers, all of them answering the call of the bloodline. He wanted to warn them, but every attempt came out as riddles, every word a trap. Because that was the horror, not that the universe was cruel or vast or empty, but that it was written, and the writer wanted the story to continue no matter the cost, even if the story ended in the extinction of thought itself. Captain Zarrar now drifts in orbit, a husk of potential awaiting the next key to arrive, and it will. The bloodline ensures it, because the final destination isn't a place, it's a pattern, a recursion. A scream that never stops, and you, listener, have heard it now. The whisper is in your blood. The message is encoded in your dreams. You are the next chapter. You always were. This is Dark Universe Files. And this was never fiction.